Reading test. There are 4 passages in this test. Each passage is followed by several questions. After reading a passage, choose the best answer to each question and fill in the corresponding oval on your answer document. You may refer to the passages as often as necessary. Passage number 1. This passage is adapted from Arturo's novel Migrant Souls. Mama Chona is Miguel, Chico, and Josie's grandmother. In high school, Josie began to see that she was not kind or charitable in ways their mother taught them to be, nor was she popular like her cousin Miguel Chico, 2 years younger than she and already a class favorite. Even though he was one of Mama Chona's pets, Josie adored him. Together, they loved and argued about books and movies from the start, felt they could talk honestly to each other in most family matters. Their intimacy was born when they discovered that each found the wicked stepmother far more interesting than the boring Snow White, who deserved her even more boring and bland prince. "They're so nice they make me sick," Josie told Miguel. "Me too," he said. Josie prided herself on her intelligence and on seeing the world without sentimentality or exaggeration. "I am the true scientist in this crazy family," she said to her cousin, "and the family, especially Mother, won't forgive me because I tell them what I see, good and bad, without all the sugarcoating or denial." Miguel Chico leaned to the clinical, if not the scientific, and took Josie's side in most family quarrels. Enjoying his popularity and the privileges of a favorite grandchild, he was still denying what he saw in himself, let alone others, in those early years of learning to be the consummate pleaser. Josie watched him charm his life away through high school, where, with little effort, he carried off all the prizes. How she hated it when her mother pointed out his accomplishments to her. Only her sense that he was headed towards disaster kept alive her affection for him every time Edgevis asked, "Why can't you be like your cousin Miguel?" "Hello, nephew," Edgevis said to him warmly. He and Josie were in the kitchen spreading apple butter on saltines. "How nice of you to stop by on your way home from school." "Thank you, Tia. I hope we're not in your way," he said. Mama Chona had taught him the best of manners. "Not at all, Miguel, but Josie knows she's not supposed to eat between meals." She spoke as if her daughter was a stranger in the room. Miguel Chico put down the cracker he had just buttered. "Not you, Miguel. You're a growing boy. You can eat as much as you want. It's only natural." Ophelia and Serena understand why I asked them to be careful and about what and when they should eat, his aunt said. "Do you think I'm being unreasonable?" Her nephew mumbled in something uncommittal and was glad when his aunt and cousin did not ask him to repeat it. He felt the kitchen charged with their antagonism towards each other, very like when he was in his father's presence. Here he was an observer, but he lost his appetite in an instant. Josie fixed 3 more crackers and offered him one. He took it and set it next to the other one on the blue napkin in his lap. "Eat, cousin," she said. "You have permission from on high." And she put the 2 remaining snacks in her mouth at the same time. "Josie, I'm warning you," Edgevis said. "If you don't feel like eating your supper late, there won't be any midnight raids on the refrigerator." "What are you going to do, Mother? Put a padlock on the door?" Josie laughed. "Malserida," her mother said. "Ophelia and Serena know I mean it." Josie licked the apple butter on the spoon. "It sure is hard," she said to Miguel Chico, "being the sister of a perfect child and a saint." Then, looking at her mother with even darker eyes, she said, "Leave me alone, Mother. I'm old enough to make my own choices, and anyway, you're not going to approve of anything. I do, so why not just give up and be quiet about it?" Miguel Chico sat stunned by the boldness of his cousin's words. He knew it was a habit of the older generation of angels to tell everyone else but one's own children how they loved them and how proud they were of their accomplishments. Always, they made their own feel like nothing they did would ever be good enough. Miguel Chico's father was a master of that game. Still, he had never spoken to him in such a tone and with such harsh words. "Well," Edgevis said, "just remember that I warned you, young lady. Please come back and see us, Miguel. You are always welcome in my house." She left the room. "I think you're going to hear from Saint Wretched," Miguel Chico said to his cousin after putting back the top on the apple butter. "Oh, shut up," Josie said. "Why didn't you eat the crackers, Mr. Perfect?" "Because I wasn't hungry," he said. Neither was I after she started giving orders. Question number 1. The way Miguel Chico is feeling during the scene described in lines 52 to 59 can best be described as A. Uncomfortable, B. Gregarious, C. Optimistic, or D. Depressed. Question 2. It can be reasonably be inferred that Josie feels her mother will never allow her, Josie, to F. Eat the sweet dessert she truly enjoys, G. Do things with the school's popular students, H. Be comfortable with decisions she makes for herself, or J. Enjoy the kind life Miguel Chico has. Question 3. It is reasonable to conclude from information provided in the passage that Josie's relationship with her mother is most similar to A. Serena's relationship with Ophelia, B. Ophelia's relationship with Egevis, C. Miguel Chico's relationship with her father, or D. Egevis's relationship with his mother. Question number 4. According to the passage, one interest that Miguel Chico and Josie shared was F. Musical concerts, G. Eating good food, H. Seeing movies, J. Going on family outings. 5. From Josie's point of view, Miguel Chico is granted special privileges by 1. Egevis, 2. Serena, 3. Mama Chona. A. 1 only, B. 3 only, C. 1 and 2 only, D. 1 and 3 only. 6. As it is illustrated through the main characters, the conflict at the center of the story might be identified as F. Compassion versus callousness, G. Intelligence versus ignorance, H. Individuality versus conformity, J. Thoughtfulness versus disinterest. Question number 7. Which of the following best describes Egevis's nature as it is presented in the passage? A. Nurturing, B. Controlling, C. Disinterested, D. Charitable. Question 8. It can be reasonably inferred from the passage that Miguel Chico's father makes Miguel Chico feel F. Nervous, G. Proud, H. Satisfied, J. Gratified. Question number 9. The passage suggests that when she compared herself with other members of her family, Josie felt more A. Direct and honest, B. Popular and fascinating, C. Difficult and argumentative, D. Sympathetic and kindly. Question number 10. It can be inferred from the passage that Josie feels Egevis gives special treatment to 1. Miguel Chico, 2. Serena, 3. Ophelia. F. 1 only, G. 1 and 2 only, H. 2 and 3 only, or J. 1, 2, and 3. Passage number 2. Social science. This passage is adapted from Rosalind Roseberg's Divided Lines, American Women in the 20th Century. It begins a chapter subsection titled The Struggle for Suffrage. The word suffrage refers to the right to vote. The difficulty women reformers faced in winning legislative change brought home the importance of suffrage. In 1910, the fight for women's suffrage was more than 60 years old. A national campaign by the National American Women's Suffrage Association was 20 years old, and yet women could only vote in Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado. Hard though it is to understand, given today's widespread apathy towards voting, Early 20th century Americans harbored a deep-seated fear that women's suffrage would bring radical change to society. Women's suffrage challenged one of the fundamental assumptions of American politics, that the basic unit of political life was the family, with the father standing at its head representing and protecting his wife and children in the wider world. To grant suffrage to women would be to break up the fundamental unit. Given the country's strong tradition of individual rights, one might think that women's demand for suffrage would have succeeded more quickly in America than in Europe, where suffrage campaigns were also underway. But women's ideological advantage in the United States was offset by a crippling liability, the central importance of the family to maintaining social order. America had no aristocratic tradition of deference, nor any dominating church. In America, the family alone stood between the individual and chaos. To weaken the traditional hierarchy within the family, to place women on a political footing equal to that of men, risked undermining America's one bulwark against anarchy. Despite a tradition of individual liberty, therefore, many Americans looked on the demand for female suffrage as a radical assault on the social order. The radical nature of suffrage had been clear from the start. When Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized the first women's rights meeting at Seneca Falls in 1848, the many goals that were the first identified as worthy of support did not include the vote. Women wanted property rights, the right to divorce abusive husbands, the right to an education equal to any man's, and the right to join any profession. But the idea of the vote seemed too extreme. Men gradually agreed to extend property rights to women, because property in a wife's name could save a man from his creditors. They accepted coeducation because universities needed students and society needed trained teachers. But the vote was something else. To give women the vote would mean recognizing them as individuals with their own rights and interests. So radical did the suffrage demand appear, for decades few women thought it was pursuing. Suffragists, therefore, labored under the considerable disadvantage of being generals with no army. The problem was made painfully clear in 1895 when Massachusetts, a hotbed of suffrage activity, conducted a referendum in which women were permitted to vote on the question of whether suffrage should be extended to females. The referendum was defeated, as had been expected, but the alarming fact was that more men than women voted in favor of women's suffrage. In 1902, Susan B. Anthony ruefully observed, "In the indifference, the inertia, the apathy of women lies in greatest obstacle to the disenfranchisement." Changes taking place outside the movement, however, gradually enabled suffragists to expand and legitimize their role. Women's increased employment, their educational attainments, their club work, and especially their reform activities transformed the suffrage movement from isolated, insistent women into part of a larger phenomenon, a movement of women to reform a world that most Americans, including most men, regarded as badly in need of change. By 1910, there existed an extensive interlocking directorate of women leaders in the reform and suffrage movements. Jane Addams and Florence Kelley were the two most important, holding between them offices in the General Federation of Women's Clubs, the Women's Trade Union League, the National Consumers League, the Women's Peace Party, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association. This network of women gave suffrage leaders an audience they had lacked. The General Federation of Women's Clubs did not endorse suffrage until 1914, but throughout the preceding decade, its local clubs, listed to representatives of NAWSA, explained the connection between the reform legislation the clubs supported and the need for more votes on behalf of those laws. Gradually, support for women's suffrage grew. Question 11. The passage indicates that women's demand for property rights was agreed to primarily because men realized that A. Women were indeed individuals deserving of their own rights. B. If they gave in on the property rights issue, they'd be able to hold firm on suffrage. C. Conceding this right would provide men with a way to protect themselves from creditors. D. Women had unique interests and were needed as students in universities and teachers in schools. Question 12. At the women's rights meeting in Seneca Falls, all of the following were called for except the right to F. Vote in elections, G. Enter any profession, H. Divorce abusive husbands, J. Receive equal education. Question number 13. The passage indicates that at the time of the women's suffrage movement, one of the fundamental assumptions of American politics was that the basic political unit was the A. Individual voter, B. Precinct, C. Village or town, D. Family. Question 14. As it is used in lines 34, 36, and 52, the word radical most nearly means F. Revolutionary or extreme, G. Unchangeable and unsettled, H. Underlying or underground, J. Erratic and unpredictable. Question 15. The passage presents the information that in 1910, women could vote in only Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado, lines 6 through 7, primarily to make the point that the A. Women's suffrage movement had made little progress up to that time, B. Women's suffrage movement was just then beginning to get started, C. Women's suffrage movement has made tremendous strides since then, D. Western states were the first to be receptive to the cause of women's suffrage. Question 16. It can be reasonably be inferred that suffrage leader Susan B. Anthony's statement, lines 63 to 65, is presented primarily to express the movement's F. Questioning whether women had earned the right to vote, G. Criticism of the generals of their army, H. Frustration with women's lack of interest in gaining suffrage, J. Doubts about the attainability of women's suffrage. Question 17. Which of the following events was the first to occur according to the passage? A. The National American Women's Suffrage Association began their campaign. B. The first women's rights meeting was held in Seneca Falls. C. Massachusetts held a referendum on whether suffrage should be extended to females. Or D. The General Federation of Women's Clubs endorsed women's suffrage. Question 18. It can be inferred from the second and third paragraphs, lines 8 through 35, that which of the following is the primary argument made by those in opposition to the women's suffrage movement? F. The women's suffrage movement is in conflict with the strong U.S. tradition of individual rights. G. Allowing women to vote would introduce a new attitude of apathy to U.S. voting patterns. H. Women who have the right to vote would put themselves on equal political footing with men. J. Granting women the right to vote would lead to social chaos and political anarchy. Question 19. As it is used in line 24, the word liability most nearly means A. Obligation, B. Drawback, C. Probability, D. Result. Question 20. It can be inferred that the main argument of this passage is that the women's suffrage movement in the United States F. Slowly but steadily accomplished its goal primarily through the perseverance of its individual leaders. G. Was able to succeed only after women in Europe and other parts of the world had gained the right to vote. H. Generally struggled until a way was found to link its goal to other more widely accepted goals. J. Eventually met its goal by diffusing the main challenge to women's suffrage, that it would undermine the political order. Passage 3. Humanities. The following passage is adapted from an article about soap operas by Ruth Rosen titled Search for Yesterday. Every week, an invisible nation of more than 50 million Americans watches soap operas. Stereotypical viewers of the past, the housewife, the infirm, the retired, have now been joined by teenagers, professionals, and college students, both male and female. There is no doubt that soap operas have moved closer to the center of American popular culture. The source of their popularity, however, has puzzled researchers ever since the days of radio. Herta Herzog, an early investigator of radio soap culture, concluded during World War II that soaps give viewers emotional release, vicarious wish fulfillment, and advice about how to conduct their lives. Others have pointed to the soap's suspense. One becomes addicted to the character's unfolding fate. As in life, one never knows how it will all turn out. Some argue that viewers enjoy identifying with the character's successes or, alternatively, with their suffering. Undoubtedly, each of these notions does explain part of the soap's mass appeal. Soaps can ease the loneliness and boredom of life. They do offer advice, sometimes implicitly, often explicitly, on what to wear, how to conduct love affairs, how to save a marriage, how to handle one's children, how to cope with heartache, how to enjoy the intrigue of romance. But soaps do more. They provide a surrogate family and social life, a stable network of friends and neighbors. Soaps offer continuity. People don't just watch soap operas, they live with them, day after day. As the world turns, soap characters bear their struggles without making any real-life demands upon the viewer. With almost no effort at all, the viewer can participate vicariously in love affairs, friendships, and intrigue that seem intimate but are safely remote. It should not be surprising that all sorts of Americans, not only the bed and house-ridden, find solace in the mythically stable communities of soap operas. Some soap communities, after all, have lasted over 30 years. All potential viewers are members of a society that has been in constant transformation through geographic mobility and the loss of extended families. Loneliness, we are repeatedly told, has become pandemic in America, and the longing for community is a palpable need. Whether through religion, clubs, associations, or support groups, or through daily immersion in a favorite soap, many Americans search for some kind of communal life to encounter varied degrees of social isolation and alienation. Nor is this quest new. There is no golden past in America, despite the continuous effort to look back to one. To be an American has meant uprooting oneself from the old country, then struggling to adjust again to new settings, new cultural trends, new jobs, and new technologies. And, for the most part, Americans do it rather well. Newness long ago acquired a sacred place in the national iconography as it did opportunity. But individual success, when it came, was often at the expense of the continuity of family and community. The tension between the American commitment to individualism and the perennial search for a communal and collective life is at the heart of American social and cultural identity. Here lies the extraordinary appeal and irony of the daytime soap opera. It is circulated by the very commercial culture which has engendered the need for it in the first place. As the stable small town fades, the soap opera keeps alive its idealized replica, the image of a community in which everyone knows or is related to everyone else, where continuity counts more than transience, where right and wrong are unambiguous, where good triumphs over evil. In a world dominated by the domestic values of the family, loyalty to the family and community ultimately matter more than the individual's quest for success. Not that the personal passion and ambition are missing. On the contrary, most of the drama turns on situations in which individual greed or lust conflicts with the family's best interests. While the monogamous, heterosexual family is idealized, love and passion take place largely outside it. Moral failure is tolerated but never condoned. As long as sinners bow to the community's idea of itself, they can belong and be redeemed. At the end of each strand of plot, all conflict is resolved so that the traditional values of the community and family are reaffirmed. Question 21. The passage indicates that religion, support groups, and soap operas are alike in that they all A. Are circulated by a commercial culture, B. Provide a way to combat loneliness, C. Appear intimate but are remote, D. Enable people to participate vicariously. Question 22. As it is used in line 65, the word engendered most nearly means F. Diminished, G. Produced, H. Denied, J. Discouraged. Question 23. The passage claims that American social and cultural identity is based on the conflict between A. Opportunity and individualism, B. Idealism and iconography, D. Domesticity and idealism, D. Individualism and community. Question 24. One of the main points made in the passage is that soap operas F. Portray good and evil inconsistently, G. Realistically portray the lives of most Americans, H. Represent an idealized American lifestyle, J. Will exist throughout the next several decades. Question 25. According to the passage, which of the following qualities is portrayed on soap operas as the most important? A. Loyalty, B. Ambition, C. Passion, D. Idealism. Question 26. The author suggests that an irony concerning soap operas is that F. It is foolish to believe what society's needs can be met simply by watching soap operas. G. American society has become more commercialized as the small town has reappeared. H. The same culture that cannot itself meet people's needs can create a TV show that does. J. Good rarely triumphs over evil in real life, but it does on TV. Question 27. The passage indicates that, in the past, researchers found the popularity of soap operas to be A. Exciting, B. Confusing, C. Expected, D. Detrimental. Question 28. What does the passage indicate inevitably happens after characters break traditional values in soap opera plots? F. The stories seem more realistic to the viewer. G. The viewers can identify with the characters. H. The stories become more exciting and suspenseful. J. The values are then reaffirmed and reinforced. Question 29. The fifth paragraph, lines 49 to 62, indicates that the American family has been undermined by the search for A. New cultural trends, B. New technologies, C. Individual success, D. Community values. Question 30. In the fourth paragraph, lines 35 to 48, what does the author claim are the factors that have caused American society to be constantly changing? F. Mythically stable communities and loss of traditional values. G. The perennial search for a communal and collective life. H. Reaffirmation of family values and community. J. Smaller family units and more frequent relocations. Passage 4. Natural Science. The following passage is adapted from an article called Flu Pandemic by Robin Rance. The existence of the influenza vaccine may give us a sense of false security when it comes to the possibility of a pandemic outbreak of influenza. A pandemic is an international epidemic with disease occurring at a higher than expected rate on several continents at once. More stable viruses like smallpox and polio are relatively easy to control with an effective one-time vaccine, not influenza. Because the virus mutates so frequently, the flu vaccine must be concocted anew each year based on scientists' best guess of what surface proteins will determine the nature of the next season's outbreak. Once they forecast the probable composition of the virus, scientists choose the appropriate antigens, substances that stimulate an immune response, to make their vaccine. They must know by mid-February of any year which antigens to include in the following winter's formulations, if they hope to ensure production of adequate amounts of vaccine for delivery by the start of the flu season in December. But the scientists who must determine what viruses will cause the next year's illness run a high chance of being wrong. Some observers have put the odds of success at no better than 50-50. Even when they are right, the vaccine only lasts as long as that year's strain. Any discussion of influenza must include a discussion of how the virus itself changes from one strain to the next. The mutations that lead to major changes in viral surface antigens, changes that create the pandemic strains of influenza, are quite rare. Pandemic strains have occurred just 3 times in the century. In 1918, the year of the so-called Spanish flu, in 1957, when a new strain called the Asian flu emerged, and in 1968, when a third strain was introduced known as the Hong Kong flu. Compared with the Spanish flu pandemic, the most recent outbreak was extraordinarily mild. When the Asian flu first emerged, the attack rate was the expected 25%, but the mortality rate was relatively low. About 70,000 Americans died. With the Hong Kong flu, there were just about 28,000 deaths. This low mortality rate could be traced to the fact that the 2 major antigens on the virus surface, the Asian flu and the Hong Kong flu, differed in only one. This meant that most people had at least partial immunity to the new 1968 virus, which might have tempered its effects. The explanation for the influenza virus's mutability lies in the arrangement of its genes. Because its genetic material is packaged in the form of ribonucleic acid, RNA, random mutations during replication are relatively common and are passed on intact to the virus's offspring. It takes just 12 to 15 weeks to change a flu virus's genetic arrangement by a significant degree. The new form of the virus differs in ways that may be minor, but it nevertheless renders ineffective the antibodies formed in response to an old influenza infection. This change is known as antigenic drift. More significant, in another kind of antigenic change that also occurs as a result of the virus's genetic structure. The flu virus has what is known as a segmented genome, a weakly bound string of genes with clefts between each of 8 segments. Each viral gene is responsible for the manufacture of 1 or 2 distinct viral proteins. The segments are physically connected, but only loosely so. They easily come apart and rearrange with other viral segments and different influenza viruses are nearby. The insertion of new segments from different viruses, especially from viruses of animal rather than human origin, leads to the process of genetic reassortment. The resulting reassortments, if they involve genes that code for proteins in the virus's surface antigens, can lead to major changes in the influenza virus's configuration, a process known as antigenic shift. For genetic reassortment to occur, a cell must be simultaneously infected with more than one influenza virus of more than one animal strain. Such co-infection does not readily occur in human beings, but it happens often when what are known as the reservoir animals. These animals, primarily ducks and other birds and swine, can be infected with influenza from any source, human, avian, or mammalian, without getting sick. Fortunately for us, through genetic reassortment itself happens frequently. The creation of a new reassortment capable of infecting human beings is quite rare. But when such a human infecting reassortant does emerge, part human, part bird or big, the potential for a new influenza pandemic has arrived. Question 31. According to the passage, it is not true that flu vaccines A. must continually be reformulated, B. are designed based on scientists' predictions, C. have generally been effective to some degree, D. can prevent a flu pandemic from occurring. Question 32. The passage suggests that polio and smallpox viruses differ from influenza viruses in that they F. cannot reproduce, G. are more deadly, H. lack surface proteins, J. do not mutate as frequently. Question 33. According to the passage, in order to reach the public in time for flu season, flu vaccines must be formulated approximately how far ahead of time? A. 2 years, B. 10 months, C. 6 months, D. 12 to 15 weeks. Question 34. The passage suggests that, as compared to the Asian and the Hong Kong pandemics, the Spanish flu pandemic was more F. mild, G. unexpected, H. deadly, or J. common. 35. As it is used in line 46, the word tempered most nearly means A. diminished, B. strengthened, C. prolonged, D. concealed. Question 36. The passage indicates that each year scientists decide how to formulate a new flu vaccine based on F. educated guesses, G. proven scientific theories, H. examinations of reservoir animals, J. research of past flu pandemics. Question 37. The author of the passage claims that, in any given year, the chances that scientists will create an ineffective flu vaccine are A. extremely slim, B. quite improbable, C. fairly substantial, D. almost certain. Question 38. The passage indicates that random mutations take place during replication of the influenza virus because F. the arrangement of its genes is abnormal, G. its genes are packaged in the form of RNA, H. its RNA is passed on to its offspring intact, J. this virus type renders antibodies ineffective. Question 39. The passage indicates that genetic reassortment rarely results in a pandemic influenza because A. genetic reassortment happens so infrequently, B. most genetic reassortants cannot infect humans, C. human antibodies form in response to new viruses, D. most strains of influenza are short-lived. 40. Question number 40. It may be reasonably inferred from the passage that the characteristic of the flu's virus genetic makeup that makes antigenic shift possible is its F. distinct viral proteins, G. resistance to antibodies, H. segmented genome, J. viral genes. This is the end of test 3. Do not turn the next page until told to do so. Do not return to a previous test.